The cold before dawn has a sound. Not silence, a hum low and steady, the breath of a city not yet awake. I have stood inside that hum for 22 years, and in all that time I have never once moved before the order to move. Not for a fist. Not for a blade once, years ago, that came closer to my collar than anyone ever wrote down. Stillness is the whole of what I am. It is the only thing I was ever truly good at. That morning I broke it, and I would do it again. It was 4 hours before the changing of the guard, the forecourt empty except for the gulls and the first gray bleeding into the sky over the eastern wall. My post that week sat at the old gate, not the one tourists photograph, not the one with the gilded railings and the crowd 3 deep by mid-morning. The old gate is plain stone, narrow, used for deliveries and for things the household prefers arrive before anyone is watching. I had drawn it 11 times that year. I never minded it. The old gate is quiet, and quiet suits me. A black car came through first, slow, headlights off, tires hissing on wet cobblestone. Behind it, a military transport vehicle, dark green, moving at a crawl. The kind of crawl a driver uses when carrying something that cannot be jostled, something that has already traveled too far and too roughly to be handled carelessly now. Both vehicles stopped 20 feet from my post. For a moment, nothing happened. The transport's engine ticked as it cooled. Somewhere above the wall, a gull complained and went quiet. Then the rear door of the black car opened, and a young officer stepped out. Couldn't have been past 25. His uniform pressed, but his face the color of the sky behind him. The gray of a man who has not slept in 2 days, and does not expect to for a third. He went to the transport himself, opened its rear doors himself. No driver came to help him. No second officer appeared from the gatehouse, because the gatehouse did not yet know to expect anyone. The official reception was scheduled for 10 o'clock, with a chaplain and an honor cordon, and the household standing in their dress uniforms along a red carpet that had not yet been unrolled. This was the part before all that, the unscheduled part, the part where a soldier comes home in the dark, because the flight landed at 3 in the morning, and grief does not keep office hours. Inside the transport, secured and draped, was a coffin. I knew the flag before I could read it, knew it by the weave, by the particular faded crimson of a battalion color, dyed differently than the household's own, by the small embroidered crest at the corner that I had worn on my own shoulder for 6 years before I ever stood at a palace gate. 3rd Fusiliers. My old regiment. I did not move. That is the order, and it is not a soft order. A sentry at his post does not react to traffic, to deliveries, to grief that arrives before the household wakes. We are fixtures. We are meant to be furniture with rifles, and I had spent 2 decades being very good furniture, through tourists who spat, through a drunk who once grabbed for my weapon in the dark and learned in under 4 seconds why that was a mistake, through the small daily insults of people who forget that the man standing perfectly still is in fact a man. The young officer straightened his cap. He looked toward the gatehouse, toward me, instinctively, the way anyone looks toward a uniform when they need help. And for half a second I watched his face, hope that someone would come. No one came. His shoulders dropped very slightly. Then he turned back to the transport, and another soldier climbed down from the cab, older, a sergeant, his face set in the particular blankness men wear when they have done this exact task before, and know exactly how heavy it is. The 2 of them eased the coffin from the transport. Just 2 of them, no bearer party, no music, no crowd. They lifted it between them, braced it, and began the slow walk toward the service entrance, the plain steel door 15 feet past my post, the one delivery's use, the one that leads to a corridor and a freight elevator, and, eventually, to wherever a body waits before a household is ready to receive it properly. That was when the rear window of the black car came down. A woman sat inside it, 60, perhaps older, a gray wool coat buttoned to the throat, her hands folded so tightly that the knuckles had gone the color of bone. She was not crying. She was past that. I have seen that face before, on men coming back from places I won't name, the face of someone who used up all their tears over an ocean and has nothing left now but the watching. She watched the coffin lift. She watched it turn carefully to clear the transport's door. She watched 2 strangers carry the only thing she had left toward a steel door in a stone wall, in the gray hour before anyone else in the world would know her son had come home. The coffin came level with my post, 8 feet away, close enough that I could see the small brass plate fixed to the lid, too far to read the name, but I didn't need to. I knew the regiment. I knew, roughly, the kind of places that regiment had been sent in the last 2 years. because I had been sent to some of them myself a long time ago, in a uniform that didn't have brass buttons or a bearskin, or any of the ceremony that now defines my days. My orders were simple: do not move, do not acknowledge, do not feel, or if you feel, do not let it reach your hands, your face, your spine. I had obeyed those orders through 22 years of my own life, passing by outside this gate. A wedding I stood through in dress uniform because the watch couldn't be covered. My own father's funeral, attended only because another sentry agreed to a double shift, and even then I stood at the back in uniform. I was, by every measure the regiment keeps, the best at this. 22 years without an unauthorized movement. It is a record. Someone, somewhere, has it written down, and I thought, in the half-second the coffin passed me, of a man named Corporal Aldous Rain. We served together for 14 months in a place I do not speak of. He was 20 when I knew him, loud the way young soldiers are loud because the alternative is too quiet to bear. And he used to say, late at night, when the noise outside had finally stopped, that the worst thing about the job wasn't the danger, it was going home in a box with no one there to see it. Not for the medals, he'd say, just so somebody knows you arrived. He didn't come home. I went to a memorial for him, years later, in a chapel with 11 people in it, 4 of them family, and I remember thinking even then that 11 was so much less than enough. The coffin reached the midpoint of my post. I broke, not loudly, not with a sound. I simply turned, a quarter turn, sharp, the kind of movement we drill 10,000 times until the body does it without the mind's permission, and brought my rifle up into present arms. Full salute. Alone in an empty forecourt 4 hours before any ceremony was scheduled, for a soldier whose name I did not know, carried by 2 men who had not expected anyone to notice them at all. The young officer stopped mid-step. The sergeant's eyes flicked sideways, just for a moment, and something in both their faces did the same thing at once. A kind of crack, a held breath finally let go. The young officer gave the smallest nod I have ever seen a man give. He couldn't manage more. I don't think his voice would have worked. They carried the coffin past me, slower now, not because they needed to be, but because some part of both of them understood that this moment had become something. And neither wanted to rush through it. I held the salute as they reached the steel door. I held it as the sergeant shouldered it open. I held it until the coffin had passed completely from view, and the door swung shut behind them with a sound that seemed enormous in that silence. And then I heard it, a boot scrape, on the wall above the eastern rampart. Then another, further along. I did not turn my head. Even in the moment a man abandons 22 years of discipline. Some of it stays with him. But from the corner of my eye I saw Sentry Halverson, 20 yards up the wall, bring his own rifle to present arms. Then the post beyond him did the same. Then the one beyond that, and the one after. The movement traveling down the wall, like something passed hand to hand, in the dark. No order given, no signal raised. I learned afterward that none of them could properly explain it when asked. They simply said that they saw one of their own. The steadiest of them, the one with the record, the man who had never once moved. Break formation for a reason none of them needed explained, and they followed him into it without a word. Because some things a soldier understands faster than he can think. By the time the black car eased forward to follow the transport around toward the family entrance, every sentry visible from that gate stood in salute. The window was still down. The woman in the gray coat looked at us, at the wall, at the line of motionless men with rifles raised. For a son she had flown across an ocean to bring home as quietly as the regulations would allow, with no one meant to be watching at all, except that we had been watching, all of us, and for the length of one slow breath, the wall belonged to her. The car passed through the gate. I lowered my rifle and returned to position, and I stood for the rest of that watch exactly as I have stood for 22 years. Except that something behind my ribs had moved, and did not move back. I expected to be reported. I want to be honest about that. I stood the remaining 3 hours of my watch turning it over, waiting for the summons, the quiet conversation about what a sentry is and is not permitted to do, about records and exceptions and the difference between the two. I found, to my own surprise, that I did not regret it, not even if it cost me the record, not even if it cost me the post itself. The summons came that afternoon. A junior officer, polite, formal, asked me to account for my actions at the eastern gate at approximately 5:40 that morning. We sat in a small room with a clock that ticked too loudly, and he had a form in front of him that I recognized. The same form they'd use if I'd struck someone, or slept at my post. I told him the truth, whose flag it was, that I had served under it myself, though I hadn't known the man inside the coffin, only the regiment, and a friend who had once worn the same crest, a long time ago, in a place far from any palace gate. I told him about rain, though I hadn't meant to. It came out anyway. He wrote it down without comment, and for a long moment the only sound was the clock. Then he set down his pen and told me something I had not expected. The young officer, the one who had carried the coffin, had, before his own departure that evening, gone to file a report of his own. Not a complaint. The opposite. He had written that his greatest fear, bringing a friend home in the unscheduled hours when no one is meant to be watching, was that no one would be there at all, that it would simply be two tired men and a steel door, and the family left to wonder quietly, for the rest of their lives, whether anyone had noticed that their son had come home. And instead, he wrote, an entire wall of the King's Guard had stood for a man they had never met, without being asked, without an order, because one of them had decided that some things matter more than the order of the day. The junior officer closed the folder. For what it's worth, he said. The colonel read that report twice. He didn't say anything else about it, and neither did I. The standing order was reviewed within the week. It still stands, mostly as it always has. Sentries do not leave posts for traffic, for crowds, for the thousand small disrespects that pass through these gates on any given afternoon. But there is a new line in it now, added quietly, that I am told was lifted almost word for word from that young officer's report, that any guard, at any post, may render full honors to a fallen serviceman passing through the grounds, regardless of the hour, regardless of ceremony, regardless of any standing instruction to the contrary. I never learned the soldier's name. I never asked, and I have never looked it up, though I could. Some things are better left as what they were in that gray light. Not a name, not a record, not a story for anyone to retell at a dinner table. Just a flag I recognized, a mother's hands folded too tightly in her lap, and a salute that cost me a record I had held for 22 years, and was in the end the cheapest thing I have ever given. I still stand my post at the old gate. I still do not move for the things I am not meant to move for. The staring, the photographs, the small cruelties people commit without thinking, because they believe a man in a red coat cannot be touched by them. That part of the job has not changed, and I would not want it to. The stillness is real. It is not a performance. But some mornings, when the forecourt is empty, and the light is the same flat gray, it was that day I think of Corporal Aldous Rain, and a chapel with 11 people in it, and a mother in a gray coat, whose face I will never forget, though I never learned her name either. I think about the 10 o'clock service that came later that same morning, the chaplain, the cordon, the red carpet finally unrolled, all of it proper and correct. It was a good ceremony. I stood for that one too, in my proper place, in front of the proper crowd. But it is the other one I remember, the one with no crowd at all. I think about the sound a rifle makes coming up into salute in the silence before a city wakes, not loud, not ceremonial, nothing like the volleys that followed. It is a small sound, almost nothing, but it carries, in that kind of quiet, exactly as far as it needs to.